Hello everyone, welcome back to OCD Recovery. Before I go any further, if you could please subscribe down below. This is a great channel. Lots of free resources going up for the OCD community, people on their journey, people's different perspectives on what worked for them and what didn't. Rob's videos, which of course are amazing, questions and answers. Just a lot of content being uploaded, especially with the new website, OCDrecovery.com. I definitely recommend checking that out. So, and if you're wondering why I'm wearing this hat, we just got a big snowstorm, so I kind of feel like I'm in the snow spirit because I live in Colorado in the United States. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to cover a book on the reading list, okay? It's called At Last a Life by Paul David, and it's an anxiety-based book. Paul David is someone who suffered with chronic anxiety from GAD more than likely, so generalized anxiety disorder, where anxiety could be pumping physical sensations 24/7, even when you don't have like a very pronounced fear, more maybe some small underlying fears. It's not directly correlated with OCD, but a lot of the same things kind of overlap in their treatment. Rob did a really good video on this yesterday, February 25th, covering basically how some of these treatments may, the way you go about getting underneath the fear really can overlap. So what I did was I went through all the chapters. There's 16 chapters. I didn't go crazy about every single one because you're going to want to read the book. That's why we recommend the books on the reading list. And there are a couple things in here that may work for, say, someone with GAD or someone with maybe PTSD, but might not work specifically with OCD. To give one example, one of the things he says in the book is, just remember you're not your thoughts, which we know doesn't quite work for chronic OCD. If you walk around all day just saying, this is OCD, I'm not my thoughts, that's actually a reassurance and can become a mental compulsion. Even though it may work for GAD because they don't have the obsessive compulsive disorder, it still, might not work for chronic OCD cases. But a lot of the things he talks about does overlap. And if any of you have watched my videos before, knowing I'm well on the path to somatic OCD recovery, some of these things can really overlap with the physical sensation base, since that's what majority of my OCD journey has been based on, and less intrusive thoughts themselves, more intrusive urges and sensations. So chapter 1, his story. Before I go any further, the one thing he highlights on this, and this is very important, everyone who's listening, girls, guys, is everyone can recover. So there are a lot of people out there that believe they're treatment resistant. There's, people that tell people they're treatment resistant, and it's simply not true that what we know of. Some people's fears are just so deep that they might need a lot of work to basically dig up those fears. Some people who've had chronic OCD for, say, 20 years without any help can, start getting on the path to recovery pretty quickly and make drastic changes. But, everyone can recover, and everyone's journey is going to be unique to them. This is why we preach a lot about not comparing your journey, or as my wife beautifully put it, is not comparative suffering. I used to do that all the time. Well, I have somatic OCD, so I'm worse. It's not true. It's just a different fear that might take a different approach, especially having ADHD, but that doesn't mean I can't recover. So the biggest thing he talked about in chapter 1 is when, he realized that he was trying so hard, and everyone can relate with this with OCD. You try, we analyze, we have compulsions, we ruminate to get ourselves, why am I like this? Oh, always looking into the past. Maybe if I figure out my past, psychoanalytic or Freudian approach, maybe if I just, oh man, how come I can't just feel like that? And that just keeps you perpetuated in that cycle, and it's not really good for moving forward. So we kind of have to disconnect from that, and that's what acceptance really starts to almost become a perspective shift. And I'm going to talk about acceptance a lot in this video. So one of the ways he ends it is, even though the journey might be very long for some people, and it might not be easy to accept in the beginning, you're not just going to accept that right away. It takes practice, as we talk about, ups and downs, which we also will talk about, but the journey is worth the wait. That's why the book is called At Last a Life. So it's a really, really great book. Chapter 2. What are these feelings I feel? So the physical sensations of anxiety, everyone's are different. You can have heart palpitations, chronic muscle tightness, sweating, irritability, just anything that comes along with a chronic anxiety disorder. So the feelings that he was feeling is that over-concern. Now, we talk about the difference between concern and over-concern. Let me tell you an irrational belief that I had throughout my journey. My wife and I have talked about this quite often. As I was going through recovery, I was like, well, I should never be concerned. I should be completely calm at all times. So I went from one irrational belief to the other. Concern is good. Concern and frustration, through the teachings of Dr. Albert Ellis in the first 2 books in the reading list, will kind of push you in that direction that life is not supposed to be easy and life is not supposed to be fair. And we talk about this quite a lot in the YouTube channel. A lot of people's fears are based off fairness and deservingness. Things in life are going to be tough. To think that you're never going to have any tough moments in your life is an irrational belief in itself. So that over concern, why is this happening to me? This shouldn't be happening to me. Analyzing every single bit and piece of your journey can really hold you back while moving forward. And everyone's probably going to go through this, especially with OCD. The biggest thing that he talked about in this chapter was when he realized that he was trying to force recovery. Everything he was doing was trying to change his inner state. If you've watched the videos on this channel, or Rob, and I talk about this as well, and other moderators, that mental compulsion of checking the internal thermometer. Just, okay, am I feeling like this today? No, I was feeling better yesterday. I'm having a great day. One of the best things I ever heard was basically from this book that really helped me. I've had many perspective shifts along my journey. And Paul Little, who's fully recovered from somatic OCD, kind of was almost like a little bit of a mentor to me recently. And, he was the one that said, there's going to be hard times throughout your recovery process. Because, in recovery, we will try so hard to force it. And that's quite the opposite of acceptance. And then it's having that self-compassion that when you do start forcing it again, you adapt and you say, wait a second. I was trying to force recovery. Let's bring it back for a couple weeks. Let's not do anything. I've done a video called Doing Nothing, which is actually the majority of the journey. You're not walking around disputing all day because that's a mental compulsion. So, number 3, the breakthrough. Great chapter. He realized that everything he was doing, as I just mentioned, was trying to change his internal state. Anyone who has chronic OCD has, avoidance. Avoidance is one of the biggest compulsions that we have. For me, somatic OCD, I was a very high-level competitive video game player for a very long time. I was playing upwards of 90 hours a week, 36 to 40-hour tears, sitting in this chair that I still have where all the armrests are falling off. That is complete avoidance. When I was playing those video games, I didn't feel the sensation. I felt free, but I didn't realize that I couldn't go two minutes not having video games in front of me. So I was trying to change my internal state, so much so that I couldn't even last 2 seconds without those video games. And a lot of people have asked me, well, how do video games play into this? Video games was my compulsion, my avoidance compulsion. That's how that tied into my specific OCD. And the one thing that I really took away from this chapter was, man, if I struggle with this. And Kirsty just did this on the restlessness and basic irritability video she did. And it's about, you have to allow yourself to feel bad, whether that's restless or irritable. And then what happens is, as we learn in the other books, people create secondary and tertiary problems. So you get anxious because you have an anxiety disorder and you're going through recovery. Then you berate yourself because of the way you're feeling, secondary problem. And then you start, maybe as an example, you start consuming more alcohol, tertiary problem. Now you have multiple layers of problems. Some are avoidance, some are compulsive behaviors, which really are masking that underlying fear. This is why OCD can really, I like this terminology, like a waterfall with cracks in it. The OCD can get between the cracks. It will morph a lot. That's why the journey may take a little bit longer for people, because it's hard to see where it's going. And every single person who's a moderator or has gone through recovery has really good anecdotes, that's personal experience, about how it's morphed through them throughout the journey. So, number 4, chapter 4, understanding your anxiety. Not much to really say here, but I do want to mention this. This is a really important topic. Understanding that you have an anxiety disorder is more than likely not enough. Low levels of maybe anxiety, general anxiety, and Gen Pop, not a disorder like GAD or OCD, and low levels of OCD that might be what we call subclinical, that hasn't latched in the chronic format, may be able to go a little bit farther with just that, I understand what I got, I just go about my day. But the behavioral changes needed for someone like myself, I need to make behavioral changes. I had to stop drinking caffeine for a while because I couldn't balance it. I still have trouble with that. Still, 10 months into recovery. I had to stop other addictive things because I do have an addictive personality. I had to stop playing video games right now. They might come back in 3-4 years. Who knows? Maybe they never come back. Excuse me. So behavioral changes is really important. One of the examples I like to give for this is just knowing that you have a plane phobia is not enough. You have to go onto the plane and feel every ounce of anxiety in order to bring down the fear response. So just walking around all day, understanding that you're afraid of something, but not going towards the fear, more than likely is not going to be enough for OCD specifically. And it might work a little better from GAD, understanding that you have these physical sensations and then just going throughout the journey. But with chronic OCD, it's a little bit different. Now, I'm not Rob, and I've talked to Rob about why he put this book last, but there's a reason why this book is not first. This book is amazing, but there's things in this book that will probably not work for chronic OCD. Just leaving it there and going about your day will more than likely not be enough for most chronic sufferers. I know it wasn't for me. I couldn't just be like, I have anxiety, I'm going to go out my day. No, my brain was like, what happens if you're stuck forever? Blah, 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 blah. What happens if you fail? All that little ways that OCD, as I said before, morphs in the cracks. Giving up the fight, chapter 5, humongous. Again, I've already covered this. Giving up that internal fight, allowing yourself to feel as terrible as you can is basically an art. So I'm a chiropractor by trade. The adjustment has science, but it's also an art. It takes years to develop that art throughout my 4 years of being in chiropractic school. It's the same thing, not saying that OCD recovery is going to take 4 years, but it's the same kind of metaphor or analogy, is that it's an art of learning how to leave the anxiety there as you work on disputing beliefs in a non-compulsive way and going throughout your journey. This is going to take some sort of skill pattern to learn how to do this. That's okay. You're going to have relapses, which we will talk about, and so forth. But it's having that self-compassion. If there's one thing I could say that all of the moderators have talked about, and I've had conversations with each one of them, is we've all struggled, and I think anyone watching this video, including Rob, will say having that self-compassion for yourself if you have multiple things. So like going through ADHD, while OCD, having addictive personalities, I can be really hard on myself sometimes. And I have to have that compassion, and it takes a while to adapt that. So chapter number 6 is my favorite chapter in the book. It's called The Backpack. He talks about the backpack, how it got dropped off at his door one day, and it was about, how to get out of anxiety, compulsively going on forums. As I said, nothing wrong with gathering information in the beginning, but at some point, there's enough information. It's time to move on with your life, start adapting those new philosophies of unconditional self-life, other acceptance, moving with uncertainty, exposures, whatever has to be customized to your individual OCD recovery or GAD or PTSD and going forward. Just reading all day and staying in forums, picking the name anxiety guy, always having techniques, breathing techniques. Again, breathing, meditation, yoga, exercise, great things in life. Can probably get away with it if you maybe got 1 out of 2 arbitrary numbers of OCD. But chronic locked, how I was, OCD, 10 out of 10. I was in a mental hospital. Those type of techniques will not work for someone like me because the fear feels too real. I have to start accepting that fear. I'm really animated, if you haven't realized. That's the Italian in me. So great. Chapter 7, panic attacks. Ooh, great chapter. Basically, he talks about that built up energy, that pent up energy to where your body just can't really take it anymore. And this kind of goes into a couple other chapters over here where we talk about mental exhaustion and depersonalization. Your body is just like, had enough. You have so much pent up anxiety and you just have a panic attack. Now, let's talk about that for a second. Gen Pop panic attacks, we're going to talk about OCD specific here, okay, guys? We have a disorder. Accepting that we have a disorder is part of the recovery process. So, having a panic attack and doing nothing is the best thing you can do, in my opinion. And Rob's probably as well. Having breathing techniques and grounding might be okay for the Gen Pop, but remember, because of our disorder and its obsessive compulsion, rid yourself of the anxiety in the short term to keep yourself in that disorder. That's the biggest thing that keeps us locked. So if you have an anxiety attack, let's say you have panic disorder with OCD, and you have panic attacks 3 times a week, and you're always like doing breathing exercises. Okay, I gotta breathe 4 in, 3 out. I gotta ground myself. I gotta count arbitrarily. That's a slippery slope because if you don't have the tools to apply through the other teachings of Albert Ellis, it more than likely is going to become a compulsion. And that's not good. Now guys, you can do whatever you want on your recovery journey, guys and girls. I have never used a breathing technique. I can meditate now if I want to sometimes, but it has nothing to do with my OCD. I journal every once in a while. I don't do any of that other types of tips or tricks, because looking for a tip or a trick could subconsciously convince yourself that OCD recovery is as easy as a tip or a trick, which we know in the chronic format, it's more complex than that. So, 8, racing and intrusive thoughts. This is basically the one place where OCD and GAD separate fully. Rob has covered this. He mentioned in black, italicized, underlined, and bolded that you are not your fear. That technique will not work for chronic OCD 99% of the time. But it's still a major form of what people tell people. Just go about your day. Thoughts are, this is an OCD thought. Kirsty talked about this really well in a video like a month ago at work. She'd be like, OCD thought. That potentially will not work. It can become very problematic. It's about accepting that even if the 1% chance it's true, that it might be tough and frustrating, but not as bad as you make it out to be. Because this is where GAD and OCD will divide if that's what people use. If you have GAD, it's strictly physical sensations, and you can learn how to distance yourself from that and not really do much disputing and go on your way to full recovery, that's great. But for chronic OCD, it might take something a little bit deeper. And the biggest thing is too, that you have no control. We have no control over our thoughts. None. Rob did a really good video on this, or talked about this. Thoughts are like passing clouds in the sky. Your control over them is absolutely minimal. We just don't have them. And the more we think we can control our thoughts, and the more that we want to push these urges and these thoughts away, I see a lot of people in the Facebook group who I talk to just give opinions on what worked for me. If you try to push away those thoughts and, or tell yourself, not me, that I would never do that. I've heard this before. We've all heard this. OCD people are the least likely people to act out their thoughts. That is 100% reassurance, and I cannot be any more blunt about that. That technique will more than likely not work. I just got to be honest with you. It's not going to work. It takes a little bit deeper understanding. Chapter 9, not really going to talk about that. It's just success stories. Really, really good chapter talking about how other people have overcome GAD, what they've done, the techniques that they've used to go about recovery. So 10, other symptoms. Physical anxiety can bring a lot of other symptoms to the picture. A lot of, like for me, let's go over what I have experienced, what I experience. General unease with a low-grade chronic anxiety in the background, heart palpitations a lot. I would wake up still do sometimes, wake up every morning, like, sweating. Tightness in my SCMs, it's called your sternocleidomastoids. It's these big muscles in your neck. So those two muscles right there, really tight. I didn't really have a lot of facial muscle tightness, sweating at times, general irritability and heart palpitations, and like restlessness are probably my biggest anxiety symptoms. And everyone's are going to be different. This is why it's nice to learn about this, but if you're constantly on the Facebook group or a forum being like, does anyone else have this? Does anyone else have that? That can really easily become a reassurance compulsion. And we need to bring that down because you're looking for certainty. And that's certainty and reassurance are the drug of choice for OCD. So in order to get away from that, you may have something that no one else have. Your eyes might bounce. Random this is a random example. But you'll be like, oh my gosh, does anyone else's eyes bounce like that? That's okay. It's just maybe a symptom that's unique to you. It doesn't mean you can't reach recovery. And that's really important to talk about. So we have mental exhaustion and depersonalization. I'm not really going to talk about those too much, but they can go together. It's basically just like that pent up energy where your body's had enough. And it can make OCD recovery a little bit harder, but it's not that it's impossible. It's just, that's just where you are in your recovery journey. You just have got to this point where you're so exhausted. Maybe it's affecting your sleep. You're sleeping like an hour a day. And it might make your recovery just a little bit longer or more difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't reach recovery. And depersonalization, subjectively means different things, but his basically terminology of depersonalization is what I felt. It's basically just walking around in the shell all day, like no emotions, no happiness. You guys watch my videos. I'm very eccentric, outgoing, extrovert, literally top level. And I was just boop, like nothing, blacking out, like not even present. But I got through it fully, no depersonalization whatsoever, not even momentarily, gone. And even if it came back, wouldn't be the end of the world. Because I've gone through it, even though it was uncomfortable, I still got through it. That's where you learn these huge perspective shifts, by going through something and realizing that you can handle it. Chapter 12, recovery up and down. Let's spend a little bit of time on this. It's very easy to think in a setback that you're at square one. We all know there is no such thing as square one. You have the tools you've learned from before, and you can start applying them again. This is the, OCD recovery isn't like this. OCD recovery isn't like this. OCD recovery is like this. Your worst days can be followed by your best days, vice versa. Lots of peaks and troughs. Direct verbiage from Rob. He's had to put that into my head quite often. I'm at a point now for myself where I'll have, like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, so like really good, nothing, good. And then we'll just like it lashed like 2 days ago. I texted Rob, I'm like, oh my God, freaking out. But those are coming, they're much farther in between. And when they happen, I have the tools to where, okay, let's see what's going on here. Don't dispute, you're very anxious. Let those anxiety feelings be there, calm down. Once they come down to my baseline, I kind of like, all right, what did I do wrong there? What do I think was wrong? Well, I'll give you guys actually what happened. I think this is really good to talk about. My wife and I own a business, and I get a little bit too obsessed with my routine. So I got really obsessive about naps. naps. And I was like, I can't take a nap. My wife's probably laughing and she's listening. Can't take a nap. If I took a nap, you're not going to be successful, blah, blah, blah. Naps are just naps. They're like clouds. They mean nothing. You're not lazy. Your body's just tired. It's okay. As long as you're not doing compulsively to avoid, which I'm not. My training is really hard in the morning. I hike a lot, work a lot. Sometimes I need naps. And that's okay. But I'll be like, no, I can't nap. I have to be, no, I can't use this end. No. And I get so strict on my routine that I have so many musts. So I freak out. And I message Rob. And then we talk about it. We have a one-to-one. And things get better. So that's basically that. Social anxiety, chapter 14, I'm not going to cover. What are we at? 23 minutes. Rob did a really good video on this covering social anxiety. But I will say a couple things. Usually it comes from fear of judgment, fear of being wrong, fear of looking dumb. Social anxiety doesn't mean that you have OCD. You could have OCD and have a really latched social anxiety fear, but there's a lot of people who have social anxiety that don't have OCD. I have multiple friends. This one girl who I went to school with has terrible social anxiety. And the reason why they stay in social anxiety is because they avoid. It's just avoidance. They avoid and they don't work on their beliefs. Because remember, the two first books, The Myth of Self-Esteem and How to Stubbornly Refuse, were not written for OCD recovery. They were written for Gen Pop. That goes to show you how strong looking at our beliefs are and starting to shift them over time. So, chapter 15, frequent questions, not going to cover that. A lot of good questions in the book. Remember, not all of them may be catered to OCD and go like that. My wife just slid something under the door. So I will be done here in a few seconds. And then chapter 16, moving forwards with recovery. I'm going to end it with this. Listen, we know what works anecdotally. We see the moderators. We all have different journeys and different experiences and different fears. Getting underneath those fears through unconditional self-life and other acceptance is going to be vital for majority of chronic sufferers. Moving with uncertainty for the majority of the day. Not trying to dispute when you're highly anxious. Not walking around disputing all day. Mindfulness, yoga, breathing may be good further along in the recovery, but a lot of people think that, if I just do these tips and tricks, I will recover. Unfortunately, that's not how OCD is. I wish it was. That'd be great. Could you imagine if you just work on breathing exercises all day and OCD would go away? Not that simple. But thank you so much for watching. It's a little bit longer video, probably my longest one. I will be doing the Nikola Tesla video, breaking that down, a history video. That's going to be a really long one too. But thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.